Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our financial services webinar. Just a quick housekeeping thing is we have our GoToWebinar control panel on your right-hand side, and under all your tabs, there should be a question tab. So that is where you will be asking all your questions today. I am now going to pass it off to Brian Luisi, who will be our moderator.
Thanks, Rebecca. And just as a check, you can hear me just fine, right?
Yes.
Yep, sounds great. Okay, great. So I am Brian Luisi. I am super excited to be here and moderating the panel and moderating this discussion with our three panelists who will introduce themselves in a second. And specifically, our topic here is, well, it's a virtual FinServ panel discussion centered around data and a journey to faster data-driven decisions. I think what's happening recently is, as we've seen an explosion of data, we're being asked to do more with data, like always increasing the types and numbers of questions that we have to answer. And not just that, not just increasing scope, but really increasing and speeding up the time to insights and the time to value from that we're deriving from that data. So that's really gonna, in broad strokes, that's what we're centering the topic of the discussion on. So I've been in the data space for about 10 years now. I'm responsible for the solution architect team, the field engineering team in the tri-state down to the mid-Atlantic with Starburst data. So I'll kick it over to our panelists now. They can introduce themselves, and then we'll get moving into a series of questions. So Dan, do you wanna lead it off?
Sure. Thanks, Brian, and thanks for having me here today. My name is Dan Power. I'm a managing director and the head of data governance for State Street Global Markets, and have pretty much spent my whole life in the data world since I was maybe 25 years old. So I've kind of experienced it from a lot of different angles, and looking forward to being part of the conversation today.
Ahmad?
Hi, it's Ahmad Qais from Royal Bank of Canada. I'm Senior Director of Enterprise Data Analytics Architecture. Like Dan, I've been in data probably for most of my career. And what we're looking for is to help our audience answer some of the questions that they have. They might have similar challenges, and I'm looking forward to having this discussion with you guys.
Great.
Hey everyone, Paul Herlocker. I'm the CTO of Spring Oaks Capital, which is a startup in the debt recovery space. Prior to that, I was at Capital One and a VP and leader of the Center for Machine Learning. There, I have actually ended up at Capital One via an acquisition of a company that I founded focused on machine learning. And similar to these guys, have been working in kind of data and machine learning for the last 20 or so years.
All right, perfect. And so before we get going into our conversations and discussion, I just want to remind the audience that we'd like to make this as kind of as interactive as possible. There is a question box. Please submit your questions. We'll keep the discussion going, but if there's any good questions that occur ad hoc, then we can certainly raise those, and we'll try and do that as interactively as possible, and then with possibly saving some for the end as well. So please do submit your questions in the chat, and we'll be making sure to pay attention to those. All right, so let's start things off. We're going to start off pretty broad, and then maybe narrow from there. So to set the stage, what we've seen is that a key priority today for many organizations is getting data to the right people, getting data into the hands of the right people and at the right time. So to kick things off, what do you see and what are you doing today to simplify data access and to drive data democratization today? Dan, why don't we start with you, and
Sure.
you can just take us through that in broad strokes.
You know, that's a really good question, and it's broad. First of all, is having the right data. You know, being able to aggregate data in a useful way, and to then get it into the hands of the right people, which is an access question. You know, should or shouldn't this person have access to the data? And the right time component means that the time compression you mentioned before is very real. People want instant access. If they can do things on Google or Amazon or eBay, why can't I do that with data? And they don't understand, well, why does something take 2 months? We've had issues where my data governance team and we're the trusted stewards of data, it can take us 2 months to get access to a particular system that we have to, do some work on. So I think financial institutions are rightly very cautious by nature, and giving people access to data is a little bit scary because who knows what they might do with it. There's so many phishing attacks and hacking and other breaches that we read about every day. You just don't want to feel like you're giving away the store. But you have to, because nowadays, increasingly, everything is very fast-paced and very data-driven. And, on the democratization side, I think it starts with training and awareness and education and, helping raise everybody's level of skills in data so that we're not just an Excel shop anymore, but we have people that know Click and Tableau and Power BI and Python and, various AI and machine learning tools. And we kind of push those skills out, so it's not just a set of individuals in white lab coats doing the work centrally, but it's empowered people in the business who are really just looking to make decisions. But in order to do that, they need data, so we need to help them and raise their level of skills around data. So it's a complex question, and it's really a people question. It's about culture, it's about training. It's about skills. It's about, just reassuring people that they'll still have a job. You'll still be doing interesting stuff. You probably won't be, spending your whole day in Excel like you used to, but you'll have, dashboards and whatever to help you do your job, whether it be, foreign exchange or, capital markets or whatever. And we're going to help you get there. And it's not really a governance question, but of course there are governance components of it that we have to be concerned with, so we're not giving away the store.
Yeah, great points. And I think you kind of really hit on the tension that we see. The tension between needing to provide data access across, like, as you mentioned, multiple clients. You talked about Python, you talked about other access paths, in addition to the need to govern and to make sure that you don't just give it away, right? You have to have control. So really helping to manage and balance that tension. Paul, Ahmad, any other thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, I think I'm glad you brought up Excel. I was thinking about the fact that it is one of the most productive pieces of software ever developed, but it's not necessarily what we want our end users using. So I think that there's users use tools that are approachable and allow them to do their job, and I think that alternatives like investing in reporting. And one of the things that I saw at previous companies and that we're doing at Spring Oaks is actually giving analysts and power users access to notebook environments like Jupyter or notebooks or there's many different alternatives on the market. And that becomes a more powerful way for people to interact with data and not create proliferation of spreadsheets. And I think part of that is you're also seeing a democratization in coding with Python in particular and R to a lesser extent. So you're starting to see people that are in non-traditional programming roles working with data in that way. So I think it makes a lot of sense to kind of push those types of tools along with traditional BI or reporting solutions.
And from our side, historically, our business users had good access to data because we just had a single data warehouse where they managed to access the data from there. With the introduction of data lakes and data on cloud, that presented a challenge to the business in terms of how do they want or how can they access that data, especially if they don't have the technical skills. So what we've been looking at is how can we provide them with a way and a technology that allows them to access the data no matter where it sits without having to go through the large development effort of moving data around. And part of that is also the governance piece, which, similar to what Dan mentioned, it takes forever to get access to data sets. How can we automate our governance and access control processes so that we make it easier and more streamlined? And we've been developing a number of products around data that allows them to do that in a much easier way and allows the business users to explore data no matter where it sits without having to do app dev work and move data out.
Yeah, great. So like kind of that interplay between self-service, but timeliness as well. I want access to the data now. I might have to move the data around. How can I avoid doing that? And how do I sort of, how am I flexible in a space of rapidly changing questions, right? And how do I govern on top of that? Like very thorny problem. Actually, and you brought up an interesting point there about, I think about at the end about needing, in some cases, needing to get data into the hands of perhaps less technically savvy people. There's actually a question in the chat here about where do we see the concept and practice of data literacy fitting into the discussion? So I think that's a good question. I don't know if somebody wants to take a crack at that right now, but that's certainly a concept.
Well, I see that as being critical because you want to raise the bar for everybody. And, we have a number of ways we've tried to do that. We're a 40,000 person company, so obviously it's a big challenge. But, we have webinars. I just went to a 90-minute webinar internally by the State Street Digital portion of our company, which is doing things with blockchain and distributed ledger technology and so on. Which was very interesting. So I think you have a little bit of the onus on the individual to be curious and to want to be educated. But then you also have to have the resources available so they can get educated. We have an internal learning system. We have an external one that we partner with. So for things that the internal system doesn't cover, you can still, learn about that, whatever it might be. And you just have to have, at least for me, I want to stay current, but I also want to learn about new things. So I'm very interested in, digital technologies, digitization, blockchain, tokenization, etc. So I just kind of naturally soak those up whenever they come along. But it's really about giving people the option. You can continue to do your current job the current way, but the risk is that you kind of get left by the side of the road. Or you can come over and start learning about new things and, increase your skill level. Increase your value in the marketplace and become a better human resource or a better learner, and then opens up options for you in the future that because you can't stay the same. People that were coding in COBOL 30 years ago aren't still doing it today. They're either retired or they're moved on to do something else. So we all have to be kind of continually reinventing ourselves in order to be digital citizens.
Funny, I was about to say COBOL.
Yeah.
You beat me by 2 cents.
In RBC, what the office team did is actually develop the data literacy program. Basically, most people involved in data will take an assessment to assess their level of data literacy, and based on that, they will go through a set of courses to bring them up to speed with all the rules and regulations that they need to know when dealing with data. And the concept of data domains that our CDO is working on, and ownership, governance, stewardship, because a lot of those concepts are known for the people that are in those roles, but for the general population that's just wants to use data, they think it's available and there's no rules or controls around it, which is not true. You have to abide by the rules and controls of those data assets.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is I think it's important. Companies that I've seen do it successfully is they create incentives by developing strategies that embrace data and machine learning. So ultimately, people need a reason to go out and learn that. So it's as much of a strategic and cultural shift in the business, and I think people will be driven to do that. And I think it's data and machine learning and understanding how, for example, when you might have used analysis to make a decision where you could actually use machine learning and automation, to drive things in more real time. So I think it's for large workforces and existing companies, it is about all about leadership and then creating those opportunities for people to upskill behind that direction.
Great. Sounds like the literacy question actually struck a pretty strong chord with everybody. Makes a lot of sense, and I think like if you don't educate the folks who are accessing data and doing stuff with it, then your skill set gets limited, and then you're just not going to be as effective. It does require you to be curious and to provide the tools to learn as well. One more follow-up question here. I think there's a good one in the chat before we move on to the next question. It's actually around a semantic layer and where you see the role of a middle layer or a semantic layer playing into this discussion at providing data access, like as opposed to or perhaps in addition to consolidation of data into a source.
One of the actually, one of the teams that I have, we've been working on building semantic layers for the business. And what we mean by semantic layers is create that abstraction layer between the business users and the underlying data system so that they don't really have to understand and know every single system, and rather just access a single layer that provides all the data that they need. And standardize it in such a way that it gives a common understanding across the different users rather than leaving it open to interpretation, because we have lots of legacy systems that have different standards, different values for the same thing, and we use the knowledge that we have in the data analytics team, the data analyst knowledge that we have to basically standardize that data and present it via a semantic layer that's just simple SQL access. And probably you're aware of that, Brian, that we've been working with you guys on implementing some of those things throughout last year and coming year. So that's what we're aiming with our semantic layer, is to provide a consistent way to view data across the different business users so that they all look at the same data sets regardless of what they're trying to do, and abstracting the underlying data systems, allowing us to basically manipulate data, move data around without them really having to worry about that.
Right. That's a great summary, Ahmad. We're working on the same thing, kind of a lot of different places within the firm. I think it makes sense because you're basically asking people get comfortable with that front end and middle, the semantic layer. So whatever tool you're accessing the data with and the underlying meaning of the data set you're working with, but don't worry about the back end. We'll take care of that for you. We're going to standardize the data, harmonize it. One of the challenges we have is we have 3,000 systems. So there isn't one place where you can get all that data. I'm not sure it would be possible unless we were NASA. But what we are doing is trying to reduce the number of systems and consolidate and standardize on certain things for certain tasks and get rid of the other 11 systems that we currently have doing that same task, and build those middle layers, those semantic layers, so that it doesn't really matter where the data came from. You don't need to know that. We'll kind of take care of that plumbing for you, and you just have to turn the tap and the data comes out.
Yeah, I think these guys summarized it really well. I think one of the interesting things to think about, like, this is a very hard problem at a large scale, and derivative data is kind of the evil thing if you're building data on top of data on top of data. So I think making sure that you kind of have the depth of your data is not quite as high, and people don't understand kind of the source. But this is an extremely complex problem in large enterprises, and I don't know anyone that's fully tackled it.
Everyone is in some form of journey here, right? I think that's to your point. All right, this is good. Let's move on to the next section. We are in no means behind on the questions that we're gonna run through right now after our first topic. So we'll stay with, there was a bit of a discussion, I think, at the outset on governance and access, and we do know that financial institutions, probably more than any other portion of the market, face more regulatory pressure than other industries. So how do you balance that tension between simplifying data access with data governance in order to maintain, while at the same time making sure that we are ensuring that we maintain compliance with regulations?
So I can start. So
Yep.
One of the things we're working on is a way that allows us to understand how data is used and more or less automate it. So basically, we call it digital data rights or something like that around those. I'm not sure about the name, but it allows us to figure out who's using the data and why they're using it. And based on that, allow them to access it or not. And at the same time, even if they have access to it, are they using it for the intended purpose they want to use it, or they're using it for something else? That's one of the things we're working on. Now, one of the challenges that also it is not just a data challenge, but also it's a regulatory challenge, is around metadata. To be able to do a lot of that stuff, you need metadata and data lineage, which is a huge problem because a lot of our systems, like probably some of your systems, lacks a lot of that metadata, especially the business metadata. And that's one of the challenges we're solving. And it is a regulatory challenge because, like probably in the US, at least now it is you need to store the metadata, the data lineage, and you need to prove it to the regulators once they ask for it. And those are some of the things we're working on. And a lot of the governance aspects and simplification of governance would require metadata. And that's one of the challenges that probably we have to solve soon. So how do we ensure that all the metadata is complete and accurate?
Yeah, we've been working on that too for roughly the last 5 years. And it's funny because, you know, it almost brings up the image of an ancient city and someone comes along and builds another less ancient city on top of it, and so on and so on and so on until you get to the current day. So we call that, you know, exploring kind of data archaeology. It's very time consuming. You have to go back and look at these 30-year-old systems and, you know, basically reverse engineer things, but you have to do that to get that metadata. And the lineage is one of the most important things we usually start with is, you know, how did this data get here? Where does it go after it leaves here? You know, show me where we are in that flow. We have some flows that have 24 different systems that things go through before they get to their final resting place, which are, you know, it's a little crazy. But the regulators do insist on it. And then the next question that comes up usually is, okay, now that we understand the flow of how things go from point A to point B to C to D to E, where are the data quality controls? You know, what are the kind of checkpoints along the way where the data goes through some kind of data quality control? So I'll talk later on about our 2022 roadmap and so on, but that's been another big sticking point for us, which we are starting to solve. Is not only understand the metadata and, you know, through metadata management or catalogs, but also have, you know, the ability to document the data lineage, and then from there, you know, understand and improve the data quality, because it's not enough to say, well, now we know there are no data quality checks, so sorry. Not only where are they now, but where should they be, and how can we improve them to make sure the data flowing downstream is more accurate. And it just so happens that my business unit is, you know, upstream of just about every data flow we have. So we have, you know, hundreds of downstream systems that we feed on a daily basis. So obviously I'm very concerned with these questions.
Great.
Yeah, I think it becomes compounded, you know, to your point, when quality and access rights, and you want to be able to add new data sets all the time from a democratization standpoint. You know, when a data scientist is trying to train a model, and you need to pass that user context through, you know, access rights to that data, and then you push that trained model into a production environment, and it's then running within the context of a system. You have a very complex, and then it's never one person, right? It's engineers, it's you know, multiple data scientists, and they're all interacting around the system, and they want to get a new data set, and you know, so it becomes an extremely complex problem. So there's no shortcut. Like what these guys are doing is fundamental to achieving you know, that kind of velocity in your environment.
Perfect. And I think there's like the parallels between this topic and what we were talking about previously, like having a semantic layer threaded throughout all of that. Like all of that has to be managed at the same time is what we're talking about here, right? Maintaining compliance and lineage and looking at DQ threads. So just, is there a particular Well, actually, let's just one quick follow up on this one. Data sharing. Data sharing is another I think approach that's topical and that many folks are looking into. Where do you see data sharing as playing a role, or perhaps even complicating this situation?
We've been doing data sharing for at least 20 plus years. I'd say like we're not new to semantic layers and data sharing, because basically that's what our warehouse is. I'm not sure if you're familiar with our data warehouse, but we have a single data warehouse, a single database. We don't have hundreds of data marts, just one big one that we put data in and then allow people to use that data across different lines of business. So that was our initial attempt at data sharing. Now, it comes with heavy governance, or it used to be heavy governance in terms of like, how do I make sure that people are getting access to the data they need or should have access to? And we tried to create similar concepts on other environments that we're going to, is basically how do we store the data once and use it many, so that we don't have to have having redundant sets of data all over the place, worrying about reconciliation, worrying about what went missing, what's extra. And this way we try to apply our data quality rules, our reconciliation methods only once, and make the data available and shareable within a line of business. Now, we have restrictions because we have multiple lines of business.
Right.
So, and we have what they call the Chinese firewall, Chinese wall between different lines of business, where we can probably share some data, we can't share a lot of data. So we have to make sure that when we're sharing data within a line of business, we're following the government rules and regulations. And when we're going across lines of business, we have to do the same thing, is that we're sharing only what can be shared. But it simplifies a lot of things and it reduces cost. People don't really realize that the cost of having redundant data sets is really high, and it generates a lot of issues, especially when you run the same reports from two different systems and they don't match. And who's right, who's wrong, we don't know.
Yeah,
and then
which is the right number.
Which is the right number. So data sharing initially will be, I wouldn't say challenging, but it's not going to be easy to set up. But in the long run, it should be the right approach and would reduce costs eventually.
Yeah. We've come a long way going from the kind of FTP world where you'd shuttle data files all over the place and, hope they landed and that they were ingested properly. Now my business unit is building a data lake, kind of the new version of the data warehouse. We have a data warehouse too, so that's another source of data for the lake. But what we're really doing is telling all of our downstream consumers, hey, from now on, as soon as this area is built out, that's going to be where we want you to get this data from. We don't want you to get it directly from the source systems anymore. In fact, we're eventually going to shut that down. You'll get it from the lake instead. And it makes it a lot easier to share data and to have those consistent semantic layers because, like you said, build once, use many, as well as to ensure data quality and well-mapped lineage and so on. So it gets easier. We're anticipating at some point that we'll migrate to the cloud. We're not really there yet. We do have some things in the cloud. We're a big technology provider to our clients. So a lot of our clients are using our systems in the cloud to run their businesses. But internally, we still have a very high security component that makes it hard for us to just willy-nilly move things to the cloud. We do, but very gradually and very incrementally. So data sharing, though, we're constrained by our own silos because, we have these same Chinese walls where, we have a wealth management business that must be kept separate from, other businesses and so on. So the silos are tough because, you're essentially doing the same work over and over again. We hand something off to our enterprise risk management partners and they reprice everything and they revalidate everything. And if they don't, it's a risk because they're taking our word for things they really shouldn't take our word for. And then you have the regulatory component, which is kind of added on top of all that. that you have, regulatory reports, and the feds want to see, data lineage, and they want to see metadata, and they're pushing us in many ways in a very good direction that we basically are already going, but maybe not as fast as they would like us to. And then you have things like BCBS 239, which are an additional set of regulatory requirements that are being, not added in recently. They're quite old now, but we're getting closer and closer to being in compliance with them, or exceeding the mandates in some cases. But it's a lot of hard work, and it's very cross-functional, very cross silos, and requires that we had to actually up our game in terms of collaboration, just because we have some initiatives that have 10 different groups with 3 to 5 people per group. We could have 200 stakeholders on any one initiative, and when you're coordinating 200 people across a giant firm, it's a lot of work just to coordinate it, but it's worth doing. I mean, and really, you can't have data sharing without good coordination and collaboration.
Yeah, I think you're also seeing the adoption of event-driven architectures on like more real-time platforms like Kafka. So, you're basically publishing events similar to API contracts that different parts of the enterprise can subscribe to. And a lot of that's driven just by kind of shorter, different latency requirements.
That's a great point. I think much of the conversation is kind of around these static, large monolithic sets like warehouses and data lakes, but it's kind of this real-time, event-driven application as well. Things like Kafka. That's a great point. There's a couple other questions here. I think I'll hold off on those in a second. In the chat, we'll move on to the next topic. I have a sense that the questions that I see in the chat now are going to actually dovetail well with the next section. Let's see if that's true. But the first 2 points that we talked about here have been centered a little bit more around, I think, the defensive context and how we can manage the prevention of loss while maintaining compliance. That's not the only reason that companies use data. Data is also used proactively by the business to do things like drive customer satisfaction and retention, increasing revenue, ensuring that we're creating new capabilities and products with data, and for example, making sure that we target clients with the right products that they're interested in. It's sort of like the other side of using data. So let's flip to this portion of the conversation and looking to see if you can share some examples of how your org is essentially using data in this manner today.
Yeah, I can kick that off. I think, obviously you're either trying to create a better customer consumer experience or protect the customer. One of the things we've invested in at SpringOaks, we're a debt recovery company. So we're very focused on optimizing our outreach across multiple channels. And calling actually remains a really important channel for us. So we do 100% of our outbound dialing is all model driven. We're basically trying to figure out the best people and the best time of day to connect with, and then if you step back, we're further optimizing across all those consumer channels just to make sure that we're engaging people in the best way for them, to achieve the right outcomes.
Yeah, in RBC, we've been doing event collection, let's say, for about 10 years. Some of it initially used to be event collection for near real data warehousing. And what we target our channels. Initially, the whole idea was about how do we drive channel optimization by looking at what people are doing in different channels in real time and try to basically shift their engagement to lower cost channels. As we started collecting a lot of that data, that is actually telling us how our clients are behaving. What are they doing? What are they looking for? What transactions they're doing? And that allows us to basically look at what next can we do for them? How can we understand what their needs are? And how can we optimize also some of the processes that we have? Let's say if you're opening an account or applying for an account, how is the what is the drop-off rate from this data that we're collecting? How can we optimize our process? Or how people are, let's say, shopping for a mortgage. Do they have a mortgage with us, or are they looking for a new mortgage? Is it going to be a defection? Is it going to be a renewal? Or is it going to be a new mortgage? So we use a lot of that data that we collect for such analysis. Recently, I think, and I don't know the exact number, but we're talking about a few 100 million events a day that we collect from across different channels. And all that is used in analytics by the business to look at how can we better serve our clients using that data.
You know, we have always, at least for the last few years, been focused a lot on defensive things, but I've always tried to identify like 5 drivers for data management. You know, increasing revenue, obvious, that's offensive. Cost reduction, usually defensive. Increasing time to value, that's usually offensive. You know, developing a new business capability or offering, bringing it to market quickly, etc. Improving compliance, that's generally defensive. And better and faster decision making, usually offensive. We have a couple of business units that I'm not in, but we talk to them and we're affected and we affect them. State Street Digital, which I think I mentioned before, which is into blockchain and distributed ledger technology and tokenization and so on, kind of getting to the point where you can trade, just like any other asset class, these digital currencies. And then we have another one called State Street Alpha, which is very offensive, in the good sense of the word. Like the New England Patriots offense. It's basically a front to back offering for investment managers, pension funds, hedge funds, whatever, to allow them to outsource their technology capabilities to us. And we run that entire platform for them. It's based on a company called Charles River Development, which we acquired 2 or 3 years ago. And we're continuing to build that out and add more capabilities. And really, it's an interesting data sharing question, because in a lot of cases, what we have to do is plumb that platform up to all the various back end capabilities, like in global markets, for example, for foreign currency trading. And some of our foreign currency systems, they generate, 500 million rows of data a day, because they're dealing with many different currency pairs and they're priced, 1,000 times a second and so on. And we're dealing with 10,000 clients, and so there's a lot of data. It's just generally a lot of data, and yet we're finding ways to cope with it. I don't think we feel like we're perfect, but we have certainly upped our game in the last few years. Great technology people, great business people, and essentially we're moving toward a day when it's all offensive, other than the regulatory component, which of course you have to maintain in order to stay out of jail. But the new and exciting capabilities in the bank are all coming from offensive use of data. So it's a very exciting time to see that we gradually have kind of got our defensive act together well enough that now we can shift over to do a lot more of the offensive stuff, which is obviously very exciting and presents some great revenue opportunities for us. But it's challenging.
Dan, it seems like we're moving. I was going to say, it seems like, Dan, we're moving towards a world where we're not the only industry that needs to deal with these things. So in some ways we may be ahead of the curve because of the regulatory things we have to deal with.
I've always viewed it as a good thing, because I've worked in other industries where the question would always be asked, well, what if we don't do any of these things you're recommending? And the answer was usually not that much. The regulators aren't going to be beating us over the head, because there are no regulators in the high tech space. You're doing it because you want to grow, or better retain customers or whatever, but you're not doing it to stay out of jail. In the financial industry, that's not the case. Obviously, that's one of the biggest motivators you have is to be able to stay in compliance with the regulations. So I actually view that as a net positive, because it makes it a lot easier to justify a lot of the things we're trying to do.
I love the perspective. I think I've actually seen a similar pattern. This is a case sort of where you implement something, you take an approach, perhaps for compliance reasons, but now once you have the expertise in-house, you can then leverage that, like for other business reasons, right? It's there. It was instituted for one reason, but now you can kind of leverage that. And there was a very important driver for doing that, which could have been regulatory based, but now you have that expertise, you have the infrastructure, and you can move forward for other reasons. Is that kind of like a fair characterization, sort of what you're saying, and like a
Yeah.
one light look at the industry?
You try to get your ROI on the very first use case. You know, that thing should pay for itself, or you wouldn't have done it. But then all the additional use cases are just free ROI on top of that. So you've already covered your cost, and now you may decide, okay, we're going to use this to drive management reporting or increase revenue or whatever. So a lot of times that's where the real benefits are. Is it's not so much the first use case, which, you know, regulatory compliance, great, that's very exciting. It's that it gives you new capabilities that you didn't have before, which you didn't even think about using. But now that you have them, those ideas start to come to you.
That's a great point. Kind of to that, like if we just explore that a little bit deeper. You know, concept in the industry is KYC, or know your customer. So like next just sort of bullet point here in this vein is to where do you see like KYC playing a role in proactive management of data governance and risk management, or for some of the more perhaps customer satisfaction reasons, we can make it broader than that. And for things like next logical purchase or next best offer, just to give an example. So this question is around where KYC, or know your customer, sort of fits into the discussion.
So we've been working on the traditional C360, B360, which is either our retail clients or business clients, to know exactly what they're doing, and sort of like deriving new data out of that to help us in managing the client and our relationship with them. And one of the things that are going to be happening in 2022 is how do we use this data that we have in real-time AI and machine learning to basically be able to serve either insights, analytics, offers in real time to the clients, regardless of what channel they are working on. So one of the things that we've been working on recently is the concept of continuous intelligence, where we think that within 5 years, every interaction with a client will be informed by AI, and that AI could be anything from just a detection of a life event, or a detection of a purchase, or a detection of a need for a loan, a mortgage, financial advice. So that's how we plan to use the data, in terms of like, how can we do it in such a way that we're providing better value for the client in real time. Although I personally don't like the word real time, I like to use right time, because right time is more accurate, because not everything has to be real time. But more or less, like, how can we do it as it's required?
This is a key area for us. You know, keeping in mind State Street is an institutional provider, not an individual provider. So we don't have consumers as customers generally. We got out of that business quite a while ago, but we're focusing mostly on institutional customers. But the KYC aspect is critical because, first of all, it's the law, and secondly, you know, you can open yourself up to a lot of, you know, fraud and other bad events if you don't have a solid KYC picture in place. So we have a very thorough KYC process. As far as the role it plays going forward, you know, if you better understand your customer, you're going to better understand how to serve them. So the more you do, although it is an investment and it's being done initially to kind of, you know, comply with the law, you do wind up with an enhanced capability, because you now know you can micro-target that customer. You know exactly what they're doing with you at any given time. You're able to look across all the various silos and get that 360-degree view of that customer across all your businesses. Those are very important capabilities, and CEOs and heads of businesses typically, you know, they want that stuff badly. So if you can find a way to do something that complies with the law, but also satisfies that need at the same time, you're going to be a hero.
Yeah, I think automation is a key component of this, and to use Maud's term, the right time data is a huge component, and layering in rule-based systems and machine learning to take things that traditionally had humans in the loop is kind of the next thing thing, but it requires a modern data infrastructure and a lot different kind of compliance regime.
Yeah, that's totally. Actually, let me come back to some questions now that I said I was going to come back to the ones, and I was hoping they would dovetail in. These are a little bit more technical, but I think they sort of underpin the types of questions that you're looking to have answered. The big picture one I see in the question box right here is, how do you address the time to answer gap, or is if there's essentially a lag in the time you can get to data? And the specific example that's given here is, if I have to wait for the data to get to the lake, that can take some number of weeks or months before the business can get an answer to that question. This is sort of like the time value of data, or the time value of access to data. How do you start to address that gap?
So we've been addressing this for years, actually. Our data inputs to our warehouse and to the lake mainly are batch, but we also have real-time data feeding in there. And we've been doing it for a long period of time. And a lot of it has to do with the move to the event-driven architecture. So once you have a move to the event-driven architecture, you will have the ability to get the data, store it, standardize it, and make it available much faster than we used to. Yes, it will take months and weeks to put something in the warehouse or in the lake if it's coming from a batch system. Unfortunately, those systems are not going to change, but what's happening is that they're getting more modernized so that they can actually communicate between each other using things like Kafka. And that's where you tap in and start grabbing that data and using it for analytical purposes. And that's how you make it easier and faster. And some of the technologies we're using, and I'm just going to say it's Starburst, allows us to basically even tap into Kafka and query it as if it's just another data source that we're using. And then those are some of the use cases that we're working on, is how can I provide a view between the history and what's happening now to the business immediately in a simple SQL-like way. That's one of the use cases that we have for the query engine that we have. And the technologies that are out there, like Kafka, like streaming, will allow you to start looking at that data much faster, much easier, because you just subscribe to it and take a copy of it, store it in the lake, standardize it. The semantic layer will take time to build, but hopefully that you've done this prep work ahead of time. So once data starts flowing, your semantic layer is out there and you get to give access to your business users.
Yeah,
and
where I would say, go ahead, Paul.
Go ahead, Dan. Just real quick, I think architectures like a data mesh, for example, you're starting to see like a coming together of data lakes with distributed microservice-based, event-driven, all the buzzword systems. But like I think you're starting to see those come together more closely, and it's not kind of this longer cycle. So I think that's maybe where we're going. But sorry, Dan, go ahead.
No, that's fine. I would really say there's kind of two different gaps here. One of them is the physical process of moving the data or accessing the data. So, can I get it T+1? Can I get it intraday? And generally, we've done a pretty good job with that. We know what the needs are. And so we, every so often we do have, an SLA break between us and one of our downstream teams where they say, hey, you're supposed to get us this data by 1:30 a.m. We didn't get it till 2:30 a.m. But the other gap that's just as meaningful or more for me is how long does it take to build these capabilities? If someone says, hey, there's a new regulatory regime coming out of Europe and, SFTR or SCCL or FRTB or whatever four-letter acronym they're throwing at us this year, how quickly can we get the data together for that, if we don't already have it? So being able to compress that time frame and, identify the right data, get access to it, bring it somewhere or access it where it stands is obviously better, and then build the additional reporting or dashboard or whatever might be needed for that regulator or that internal group. Those are the gaps we have to shrink, because it used to be we would size things and time them out in terms of t-shirt size, small, medium, or large. And it was like the minimum size was always 5 developers for a year. And it was like, okay, well, that you just told me that's going to be $1 million. That's not going to work.
Yep.
So we have to basically start microsizing and say, okay, you've got an extra small, a medium large, an extra large, a 2XL, to be able to kind of more finely grain the different development cycles so that we can bring in the timeframes. And now we can do things in 3 months or 6 months. Which in some cases is better, because you don't always get a better result by working on something for a lot longer or spending a lot more money. If you have the right development processes, you can get those same results in a third of the time, and you don't have it follow the sun development team mentality where people are working on it in Europe and then in America and then Asia Pac and then back and back. Obviously that's hard, but it does allow you to bring in the timeframes to have 3 time zones going at once on any given problem.
Yeah, it's a great point. There's kind of the operational aspect, like once pipeline's built, you can't run, and then there's an ingestion period, which is maybe the first one. But then what happens if the question changes or there's a new requirement?
Right.
You need to be flexible, and you have to rebuild stuff, and that takes engineering effort, and there's the implementation aspect of all of that, and that's being flexible there is challenging. And Paul mentioned data mesh, which is, I think we could probably spend another 3.5 hours talking about how data mesh that concept might play into that sort of an overarching concept that really covers a lot of what we're talking about here, which is a little bit of a strategic or a paradigm shift in how you actually access data. We have 7 minutes left though, and I do want to switch to looking ahead. So last section in the last 6 to 7 minutes here it's a forward-looking section. So being predictive and looking ahead to 2022, what projects do you have lined up to drive data modernization? This is kind of a very big, broad question, similar to the first one. What do you have lined up to drive data modernization? For example, plans to explore a hybrid cloud model or on-prem versus cloud, and any new products or services really based upon data that you plan to offer.
I think my answer is going to be pretty short compared to everyone else, because my company is 2 years old. So we have a greenfield environment. We're in one cloud. We're not going to move to another cloud. I think we're continuing to focus on building out, like Ahmad was talking about, a central customer layer, focusing on kind of real time, and machine learning is driving a lot of what we're doing. It's a contrast from where I was before. Different types of problems, but exciting to be focused on this greenfield. But yeah.
So on our side, it is we're already to an extent hybrid, and by hybrid I mean we have our on-prem physical infrastructure, we have our on-prem private clouds, and we are using public clouds. And it's with an S, we're using more than one provider for different reasons. And we see the move to use more of the cloud capabilities. And some of it is around the inability to basically scale up on-prem. Like on-prem, it's really hard to scale up. And a lot of the new work with data requires to be able to scale up and down, to have enough compute power to do the operations that we need to do. So we see that there is going to be a move to the cloud, but what we're keeping in mind also, data security, is what data can go to the cloud and what data cannot go to the cloud, and what are the data protection practices that we need to have in place that we make sure that all the data going to the cloud is secure. Now, part of the work that we plan on doing on the cloud is around what I mentioned, the continuous intelligence and machine learning, and a lot of those capabilities require you to do work on the cloud rather on-prem, because probably, like you all know, if you want to add infrastructure to the on-prem, that's probably a 1.5 year project. By that time, you probably are thinking about something new, so you need to leverage.
You have another project at that point.
Yeah. And also, we're looking at the data fabric and how can we leverage the data fabric and the data mesh concept in getting faster access to data for our business users. So we're in the early stages of exploring that, but at least we're a few steps in.
Great. Dan, let's go to you and take it home.
Sure. We have a lot going on. We're already using Microsoft's cloud offering and Amazon's as well. I don't think we're on Google Cloud yet, but we probably will be. With us, it's really around client demand. If we have clients that say, hey, we'd really like to use your stuff, but we have standardized on Google, then we will find a way to get our stuff available to them on Google. And so we're already on 2 out of the 3. We also have an internal kind of private cloud, hosted by ourselves on premise, but using all the same technology. So, and that's been our predominant way of implementing stuff on premise for the past 5 to 8 years. It's just a better way than, everything being proprietary. We have a lot of open source stuff and a lot of, very kind of modern infrastructure, but it is more expensive to have us be the operator and have all that stuff going on behind the firewall. But, as Ahmed was saying, there's a lot of security questions and so on that have to be worked out. On the data governance side, we're implementing a new catalog. So we're replacing our existing catalog with a new one. We were kind of frustrated and didn't really like the vendor roadmap for the old one. And we decided, in about July, we started selecting our new catalog capability. We're adding a data quality component that we think is much more usable and accessible than what we had before. And we're also adding a different vendor for their lineage capabilities that works with the catalog. So there's a lot of great kind of infrastructure capabilities that we're adding or upgrading in the data governance space, which I'm very happy about. I've been pushing for it for 5 years and it's finally happening. So I'm like a kid at Christmas time. But in general, what we're also seeing is the whole bank is realizing that, there's distributed finance going on. There's all these fintech providers. We're either going to get disintermediated or we can disintermediate ourselves. So we're very open to that. We've made some acquisitions. We're building up some new capabilities in-house. And it's all, related to data. There's, my boss likes to joke that, the ones and zeros, it's all about the ones and zeros. And so, we're lucky that we can kind of get our hands around the data and it comes naturally to us. It's like, the difference between speaking something as your native language versus speaking something as a second language. I'm never going to be that great at French, but I'm pretty good at English. So, having that data competency, I think for anyone on this call, you should regard yourself as being very lucky because you're probably going to be in high demand for the next, 5 to 10 to 20 years if you've got those data competencies.
It's great points, Dan. And I loved how you sort of thread everything back to data literacy, like governance. All of these concepts really just thread all the way through from topic to topic. I think you can kind of see that as like each of the 3 of you spoke about each topic. It was hard not to just really see the parallels as you go back. They're all intertwined. And to your point, we're kind of all data companies now. So this was a great discussion. Thank you for your time. We're literally like at the hour now. So I think we've hit our 1 hour mark. The time, I know it flew by for me. Thank you for your insights and your time, and enjoy the rest of your day, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.